Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to my channel. Alisher here. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to get cinematic gimbal shots using a gimbal. Gimbals are used to kind of get a lot of smooth shots. Essentially, what you kind of want to use it for is to kind of remove the shakiness in certain type of footage. In today's tutorial, I'm actually going to show you guys all the steps and techniques that I actually use when I'm using a gimbal to be able to maximize my footage to the fullest capability. I'm also going to be going over different aspects of how you can use the environment to your advantage to further enhance your footage. Let's jump right into the video. Alright guys, so the first step I'm going to basically suggest is that when you're using a gimbal, you need to basically make sure that your gimbal is balanced to its fullest capabilities. I used to make this mistake a lot when I first started filmmaking, is that I would kind of balance my gimbal to the point that I thought it was good enough. You never want to run into that issue. You want to make sure that you balance your gimbal to the fullest capabilities. I'm using the new DJI RS2. When I balance my gimbal, as soon as I think it's basically up to par, I always run a gimbal automatic calibration check just to see how good it is and to see if I'm basically kind of off by a bit. The next tip I'm going to get into, guys, is actually has to do with the camera settings itself. I'm going to basically introduce you guys to the 180 degree rule. What is the 180 degree rule? Essentially, the 180 degree rule is a specific settings that you want to set in your camera to be able to basically replicate the most amount of natural looking motion blur. And the way how you do that is you take your frames rate per second and you double it based off of your shutter speed. So for example, if I'm filming at 4K at 24 frames per second, I'll have to ensure that my shutter speed is 1/50th to be able to match it completely. All right guys, so now that we got the first two tips out of the way, let's actually get into the physical positioning when it comes to basically using a gimbal. When it comes to the actual setup, I tend to notice a lot of people make the mistake of kind of start using a gimbal, they kind of have their elbows really far out. The problem with this is that you're going to be experiencing a lot of shake as you're moving around. The reason why I'm basically tucking in my elbows is because I'm actually seeing my body as an extension of the gimbal. If I'm able to stabilize myself by creating a solid base, the actual footage that's going to basically come out of my camera is going to be a lot smoother. So now that our gimbal is balanced, we're following the 180 degree rule. We've also kind of learned to kind of keep our elbows tucked in to provide an extra level of support. Now we're actually going to get into how do you actually walk with the gimbals. The most common technique to walk with the gimbal to ensure you get the most smooth footage is basically through ninja walking. Essentially what you're going to be doing is that through ninja walking, you're going to bend your knees, take a step by meeting your heel first on the ground and then finishing off with your toes. You're going to repeat this process for both of your legs at the same time while simultaneously matching the exact same distance for each single step. So I'm going to show you how that looks right now. I bend my knees just like such, and then as I'm basically going to begin to walk, I'm going to meet the ground first with my heels and then I'm going to finish off with my toes. Alright guys, so now we basically went over ninja walking. The next step I want to go into is adjusting your gimbal speed depending on what you're going to be shooting. So in the instance that I'm basically going to be filming a subject where there's not that much movement happening, I'm actually going to go into my gimbal speed settings and I'm going to put my motors to slow. The reason why I'm going to be doing that is because if I'm doing slow movements, I don't want my motors to be working too hard or too responsive. Otherwise, I won't be able to match the movement that I'm creating in my hands with the actual gimbal itself. So if I'm filming something that's going to be pretty slow, I'll make sure to set my motor parameters to slow responsiveness or to slow settings so that when I'm doing slow movements, the gimbal is able to match the speed at which I'm creating these movements pretty accurately. In the situation where we're going to be filming a fast subject, I'll go into my motor settings again and I'll switch my responsiveness to be fast. And the reason why I'm doing this is because if I have a subject that's going to be moving fast in front of me, I want to make sure that I'm able to match the movements with my hands with the motor speeds as accurately as possible. So once you know the gimbal speed to use depending on your subject and what's basically happening in the shot, you're able to nail the shot a lot easier. So my next tip now is to simply use objects and the environment as reference points to further enhance the feeling of movement happening in your shots. So I'm actually going to get my buddy here to take his ATV and basically whiz right past me, but at the same time I'm actually going to be walking in the same direction as him, and being able to create two opposing movements happening in the same shot, you're able to further enhance the sensation of movement happening. One of my favorite tips when it comes to getting really cinematic gimbal shots is to actually get your gimbal close to the ground. Another term for this is basically going in underslung mode. I'm actually using the DJI RS2 here, so it actually comes with this really handy attachment to be able to get really nice down to the ground here. Again, you can use this technique with different gimbals. You just probably have to change the setup just a little bit. And the reason why I actually like getting close to the ground is because when you're doing a lot of type of dynamic movements, you're able to see the ground whiz past the camera a lot more. And again, that enhances the sensation of movement that's happening. One tip too, guys, if you're going to be doing an underslung shot, aka close to the ground, I would really recommend using a wide angle lens. I'm actually using a 16mm. You want to be able to make sure you get everything in the shot. If I use a tighter lens like a 56mm, it would be a lot more difficult in terms of being able to frame my subject correctly, especially like in the center and stuff. So I like to use a wide angle lens whenever I'm doing low type of shots to the ground, just to make sure I'm able to get everything in the shot and make sure my framing is pretty good. Alright guys, those are pretty much my top tips when it comes to getting cinematic shots with your gimbal. Hope you guys found them pretty helpful. Now let's jump into some nice B-roll.